Hello, gorgeous people. It is 9 o'clock. It's Monday. So it's all about motivation. And we do that by, as you know, managing your critics. So we are live on Step by Step Listening page. We're live in the Manager Critic community group. If you're not already there on Facebook, please come and join us. If you find yourself getting demotivated and not able to take action and do the things that you love, or at least find the way to love the things you have to do, then do come and join us as we explore all the things that happens when we are able to manage our critic and turn overwhelm into clarity in simple steps. So today we're going to talk about how to manage our emotional responses. And the reason I want to talk about this is it came to light for me is at the weekend we were decorating at my daughter's house, and anyone who's done a DIY project will know that it never goes to plan. What seemed to be a simple task always seems to take longer than you expected it to, etc., etc. And one of the things that we were very aware of doing was taking breaks. And about 12 o'clock yesterday, we were due to have our lunch break, and both my daughter and I were extremely hungry. However, we were at a point with the decorating where if we could just finish this wall, then it could be drying while we had our break, and then when we came back there was a good chance we could get another coat of paint on. You know, the kind of thing that goes on. And what actually happened though in that last half an hour, because we were really hungry, our tolerance and our patience with ourselves, each other and the wall and the paint started to drop. Now, there is a time in the past where I might have been guilty as a parent of trying to calm or soothe or cajole my daughter into being more positive, or even myself. Instead, we were able to both yesterday acknowledge we were hungry, and this was our system's, that hangry feeling. We were frustrated with things. So two things I want to share with you today is I want to talk to you about a model. It's a really old model, but it's a really great metaphor, is the triune brain. And it talks about three core areas. Now, I've sort of relabeled them for the purpose of my book, because I think it's just a lovely, simple metaphor to help make sense of our brain and how it works. So there's a part of the brain in the limbic system that ultimately is all about your flight, fight or freeze. So if you're hungry, if you're thirsty, if you are cold or you're warm, too warm, too cold, that part of your system will be going like, oh, wait there, we need to be on high alert. We're trying to check that you've got your basic needs. And if at any point it thinks your needs are under threat, there's a really good chance you could go into flight, flight or freeze. So you end up sort of getting angry about things you wouldn't normally. So if you find yourself being irrational or impatient or intolerant with yourself or other people, becoming really critical, just check in with yourself. Have you eaten well? Have you slept well? Are you too hot? Are you too cold? Because sometimes the trigger is that we feel that our actual basic human needs are not being met. So it can be really difficult to concentrate if your feet are cold, for example. It might be difficult to concentrate if you're too hot or if you're too hungry. Now, when you understand that this is how your system is evolving, rather than making a personal accusation on yourself or other people, it means you've got choice. You can make a decision. You can either take the break and resource yourself accordingly and then help settle your state. But what most people try and do is when somebody is in this sort of flight, it's not the time to have coaching questions. It's not the time to ask them what they need. Generally speaking, because they can't process. Because what actually happens when we're in flight, flight or freeze is that part of the brain sends the blood and the oxygen out to your extremities, your hands and feet, so you can flight, flight or freeze, which means it takes it from the front of the brain, which is the neocortex, the problem solving, the strategy. So in that moment, even if you ask them a question or you're asking yourself questions, sometimes cognitively it can't happen. So the most practical thing to do is for you, if it's you you're talking about, is to take a breath. If it's somebody else you're wanting to support, often you taking a deep breath and just honouring their state, where they're at right now, without judgment, without questioning it, without giving them feedback or observations or anything, and just allowing their state to settle first and foremost, can make a massive difference because their system will start to settle. They'll start to become aware that they're not being attacked, they're not going to die, they're just a bit hungry or they're thirsty or cold or hot or whatever it is that's gone on. So that's like the reptilian part of the brain, where it's more about your human needs as a basic, fight, flight or freeze sort of survival kind of stuff. Then there's the mammalian part of the brain, which this is the where at essence we as humans are designed to be in a pack, designed to be in a group. And when we're in groups, we're trying to work out, what are the rules around here? What do I need to do to keep safe? Now, if you are in a situation like us with decorating yesterday, where you think this is the way you should do it and then it doesn't work, the brain often gets unsettled because it thrives on tracking patterns and predicting what's going to happen, because then if it can predict what's going to happen, it can keep you safe. Equally though, if everything stays the same, that part of the brain that likes to track patterns and predict gets bored and agitated. So we've constantly got this conflict within the brain between wanting certainty and uncertainty. And so often we can become unsettled because things haven't changed, or we haven't seen any progress, or there's no new information to explore, or we can get stuck and overwhelmed because too much is changing and we can't process it, we can't make sense of it, and we can't predict what's going to happen next. So particularly with my decorating yesterday, there was a couple of things where it wasn't quite going as we wanted it to, so we were having to do different things. So what we thought was going to be done in 2 days is probably going to take 4 days. And so the mammalian brain that's trying to predict what's going to happen and when it's going to happen can become unsettled. So I want you to think about yourself as well. So it's like, what are you saying to yourself? What is it you expected to happen that didn't happen? And the story that you tell yourself, how you talk about it, how you talk about the other person to it, how you talk to yourself is going to determine whether you can settle the brain state. And here's the important thing. You're not saying at this point what you actually want to have happen, or what's going to be different next, because the purpose for chatting, the purpose for talking to yourself or other people is purely to settle the state. Because when we're in that mammalian brain and we're kind of questioning things, there's the part of the brain which is like the red brain, where we're going to be like going flight, freeze, can't think, can't do anything. And if there's too much questioning going on, too much concern, too much don't know, we can flip into that reptilian brain because we feel unsafe because we can't predict. Equally, some questions can help us get into that neocortex brain where they can settle our state. They can help us to actually feel better, feel more in control, feel calmer. And the two questions that I tend to use with my clients and myself is, if I'm like feeling a bit unsettled, is I'll either ask myself, what would I like to have happen? So given that it maybe I don't know what's going on, or I could just ask myself, what do I want? So that'd be the first thing. If that doesn't work, what you can do and what will instantly settle, or not say instantly, not everybody's different, but generally speaking, as a rule with my clients, what I've noticed, if you focus on what is working, what's changed, even if you wrote down, I call it nurturing the negative niggles, write down everything that's changed in the last 24 hours. Anything that hasn't gone the way you wanted it to go. Because if you can even just get clarity of what it is that has changed, or you can get clarity of what you want to change, that in itself can settle that part of the brain, because it goes, oh, right, that's why I've been feeling a bit out of, discollaborate, I can't even say that word, out of sorts, a bit overwhelmed, a bit frustrated, irritable. It's because there's so much going on. And once you've got those sort of niggles out and they're visible and you can see them, so you've got them written down, whether it's on post-it notes or in a journal, once they make them visible, that in itself can make your system settle. You go, oh, that's why I've been feeling like this. There's all this change going on. And then with each of those changes, if you go through and check what's worked about those changes, what's not going so well about it, and what could work better. So you're actually allowing yourself to go through the process of going, I acknowledge the change, I accept it is. There will be parts of that change that you can do nothing about. But just in the acknowledging and accepting it's happening can often be the thing that settles your brain state. And when we're in mammalian, so that the what we call the sort of the green part of the brain, we can be there and be sort of problem solving and going, being really curious, or we can send ourselves into flight, or freeze where we feel threatened. And that will depend on your own personal patterns, your own story, your own journey. And if you are somebody who really worries about what other people think, and you feel really worried about not being approved of, that can trigger that flight, or freeze. It can put you into the reptilian brain because you feel like your life is in danger, because if somebody doesn't like you, like everything is going to go wrong. And I don't say that with any complacency, because that's exactly how I used to be. 6-7 years ago, I would be in a total state if I thought that somebody didn't like me. what I've learned by understanding what my patterns are, understanding what works for me, being aware of change, being really clear what I want to have happen and what works, is that when something changes or somebody says something, I can be curious about what they wanted, and I can be curious about the differences between what they want and what I want, and separate it out. And then I can make a decision. Is this somebody that I want to have a relationship with? Or even more importantly, is this somebody who wants to have a relationship with me? And the big question for me is, to have a relationship with somebody, you have to be able to give and receive feedback. So if it's somebody who just wants to tell me how I'm not doing it very well, and they are not able or willing to listen to what works or what doesn't work for me, that doesn't really bode well for a relationship by my definition of it. And once I know whether I am or am not in relationship, then I can let it go. If this is somebody who I'm not going to see again, who's not particularly wanting to have that conversation with me, then I can let it go. And I don't have to spend time thinking about it, which that in itself settles the brain. Now, that's a video for another day, because letting go is a process I've been learning this year particularly. I notice whether I'm having a conversation in my head about something that happened like 3 days ago. If it's not serving me right now, I make a decision. What do I want to have happen? If I can't do something about it now, I might put a diary note in my diary and say, right, I'll think about that again in 3 weeks' time. I'll check with myself what's happening. But I won't allow that conversation to keep going in my head, because it doesn't serve me in this moment right now. It doesn't mean I'm going to forget about it. I will address it or come back to it, but I make a conscious decision when I'm going to address it, whether that's having another conversation with myself or whether it's having an actual conversation with the person. And if I can't have that conversation with the person, then what I'm learning to do is just say, right, it's not going to happen now. And what was lovely about yesterday's example, knowing some of these tools, is that when we were getting a bit irritable, we knew that we were hungry. We knew that the basic part of our brain was needing to have nourishment, and we knew that nobody is really that tolerant when they're hungry. And so we just said, right, that it's time for a break. So rather than having a row or getting upset with each other, that's not that we didn't get irritable, by the way. We just took ourselves out of the situation, either had a break or paused and then came back to it. But when you're doing things and it's challenging you, and you're working long hours or working late, as we were with us, trying to get it all done in one weekend, it really pushed our resources to the limit. And having more compassion for yourself and each other can make it much easier to deal with those irritable emotions that crop up. So I hope you found this useful. Those of you who haven't got my book, Manage Your Critic from Overwhelm to Clarity, it is under the section Curiosity, where we talk about the model of the triune brain by Paul MacLean. It's a really old model. Neuroscience has moved on drastically since then. But as a metaphor, we find it really useful within the step-by-step listening community to think about red brains when you're in that fight, flight or freeze. You can't process, your blood's all gone out to your extremities to fight, flight or freeze. The green brain is when you're actually trying to problem solve and you're like trying to work out what the rules are, but you're not settled, and you can't problem solve because you don't understand what the rules are and something's not quite right. And that's usually because either something has changed or you need something to change, and therefore the way to settle that part is knowing what you need to work, learn and live at your best, and then having the confidence to ask for it. And so you might find yourself feeling unsettled, but you can't solve it because you don't actually know, and sometimes it's impossible to solve it in the moment. But when you have settled your state, you can reflect on what worked or what didn't work or what could work better for you. And the purpose for doing all of that is to keep ourselves in our clarity brain, the blue brain, where we do all our thinking, problem solving, and our cognitive processing goes on, because we want to have the blood and oxygen there. So it's just think about what works. For me, it's making sure I have regular breaks. It's making sure I have plenty of exercise. It makes sure I eat the right food. Sometimes I literally just need to stop and take a few deep breaths. Often if we're anxious, we're stressed, or we're struggling with something, we will hold our breath. It almost like that, and without realizing it, we're sending our own system into flight, flight or freeze, just because of the way that we're breathing and the way we're holding tension in our body. Hope that's been useful for you today. Have an amazing week. I look forward to seeing you again on Friday. We'll do Feedback Friday, where I'll be reviewing what's been happening for my week, but also encouraging you to do the same. That leaves me to say, what would you like to have happen this week? How do you need to be? And what kind of resource or support might you need? Please share, because when you answer those questions and you share what's going on for you, you inspire me and you help me understand what I can deliver on the videos that will be useful and supportive for you. Have a great week. Speak to you soon.